And we're back. Welcome back to BHL 1, another video, this time on lesson 32. We're going to be discussing the exile of Israel and Judah. Let's talk the quote-unquote exile of Israel. Recall that this covenant that God had made with Israel was bilateral. He, of course, had his unilateral covenant with all the nations of the world, salvation for everyone, but he did have a bilateral covenant treaty with Israel. There's many examples of what would happen to the people if they broke God's covenant. Here's one of them from Leviticus 26. If you remain hostile towards me and refuse to listen to me, I will multiply your affliction 7 times over as your sins deserve. I will send wild animals against you, and they will rob you of your children, destroy your cattle, and make you so few in number that your roads will be deserted. Pretty grim stuff if Israel rebelled. And we know that they did. And we got some signs of the downfall of the northern tribes of Israel previously in 2 Kings. We didn't read this section, but in 2 Kings 10 we hear, in those days the Lord began to reduce the size of Israel. He starts to trim away the edges of their territory and reduce their power and their might. We know that the kings of Israel are not exactly class acts. We've got the bad, the really bad, and the really, really bad. Notice Jehu, good for a while. Everyone else, nothing but evil. And the rebellion of the kings and the rebellion of the people leads to God turning against the nation of Israel, bringing about the destruction that he had foretold if they were not to keep his bilateral covenant. Israel was attacked by the Assyrians. The Assyrians were the object by which God was going to punish Israel. Hoshea was the king at the time of this rebellion. He ends up being the last king of the northern tribes of Israel. For 3 years, the Assyrians besieged Samaria. Previously, Aram had besieged Samaria. That was the account when 2 women are fighting about eating one of their children. And ultimately God delivers them from that siege. That was much shorter than 3 years. So imagine if the siege went on even longer. 3 years of absolute misery before Assyria wipes them out. Well, scatters them. We'll get to that. Why does God do this? Well, a bunch of reasons. All this took place because the Israelites had sinned against the Lord their God. And then God lists a bunch of the reasons. They worshipped other gods. They built high places. They had Asherah poles. They ignored the prophets. They rejected God's law. They built the 2 golden calves in Dan and Bethel. They sacrificed children in the fire. They practiced divinations and omens. The people of Israel, they acted like Canaanites. So God treated them like Canaanites and scattered them forever. God set about a little bit of a resettlement project. By that I mean that the people who lived in the northern tribes of Israel never got to go back to the promised land again. It was a permanent resettling. The Assyrians scattered them, put the people living in the northern tribes all over their kingdom, and instead filled in their land, filled in the northern tribes of Israel with a bunch of other people. They just wanted to have the land be filled with people so it didn't get overrun, so they could preserve their highways. Now, the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites. So this is the Samaritans in Jesus' day. That's why they're sort of a half-breed and looked down on. Pretty grim stuff. Things are a little bit better in Judah, but not much. Again, we've got that bilateral covenant. That's the mechanism by which we're discussing Judah. They've got some good kings and some bad kings, mostly bad kings, but they do have some good eggs in there. Especially people like Asa is very good. Jehoshaphat is pretty solid. Today, in your reading, you'll learn about Josiah, who's maybe the best king since David. Hezekiah also very good. So they've got some good kings in there, but things were still getting dicey for them, even during the reign of one of their good kings. During the reign of Hezekiah, Assyria surrounds Jerusalem. Hezekiah and Israel, they mourn, they weep, they call out to God. God prophesies through Isaiah that he was going to deliver them. And then the angel of the Lord comes and kills 185,000 Assyrians. But that siege of Jerusalem, kind of a grim foreshadowing of what was to come. There are some prophecies of destruction that take place after this. One comes about again in the life of Hezekiah. After he is healed of his disease, some Babylonians come to congratulate him on being healed, and he ends up showing off his wealth, and then God calls him out for it and says he's going to destroy Judah. Later, during King Manasseh, maybe one of the worst kings in the history of Judah, God again prophesies that he is going to wipe out Judah for their sins. And then during the life of, again, really good King Josiah, Josiah finds the book of the law. It was lost. And after reading it, Josiah inquires, what should I do? Tries to get, what does God think of this? And the message that God sends back is grim. He's still going to wipe out Judah. Josiah makes a ton of different reforms, basically removes all idolatry. They practice the Passover again. Pretty great stuff. But God still says, well, I'll spare Josiah this sort of punishment, but still going to wipe out Judah. And so eventually Babylon comes in and deports the Judean people, the people of southern tribes of Judah. So there's three different, waves, if you want to call them that, of exile. So in 605, just a few people get taken, mostly just young people, young nobles, so people like Daniel. He's in that first wave. The second wave in 597, Jehoiakim, who was the king at the time, he gets deported. The rich, the wise, the soldiers, wealth from the temple, all that gets taken away. So pretty much most of the good stuff. And then in 587, there's a rebellion from the last quote-unquote king of Judah. The temple is destroyed, and the poor are left behind to make sure the place doesn't turn into a wasteland. Really grim stuff. But in God's grace, 70 years after the destruction of Jerusalem, after the destruction of the temple, God, using the king, King Cyrus, is going to send a remnant back, a remnant of Jews to once again inhabit the promised land, to show the people that God still loved them and he was still going to carry out that unilateral covenant, even though they had broken the bilateral covenant. God demonstrated his unfathomable faithfulness.